I once worked double shifts 6 days a week just so my son could go to law school without debt. Now I spend most of my mornings listening to the fridge hum and wondering if he still remembers the sound of my voice. People think the worst part of growing old is your body slowing down, but let me tell you something. It's realizing you raised someone with your bare hands, and now they only show up when there's paperwork to sign or favors to ask. This isn't a revenge story the way movies tell it, with shouting and slammed doors. It's quieter, heavier, like realizing the thank you never came and might never come, and still having to fold the laundry. When Beatrice Monroe turned 73, she didn't throw a party. She wasn't the type. She brewed her coffee like she had for decades. Black, hot, no sugar, and watched the early Vermont sun stretch across her little kitchen window. Her home was quiet. Not sad quiet, just still, like everything inside had settled. The hardwood floors creaked with her steps. The same ceramic rooster sat on the counter, the one Jared had made in second grade and painted bright green because red was too boring. It still made her smile, even with a chip missing. Beatrice had been alone for nearly 25 years. Her husband, Charlie, passed too soon, leaving her with a mortgage, a 13-year-old son, and a grief so thick she couldn't speak his name out loud for months. She didn't fall apart, though. She worked hard. Day shifts at the courthouse, night shifts, sorting files, weekends, cleaning offices for extra money. Not because anyone asked her to, but because Charlie would have done the same. Jared was everything to her, her reason to keep going. She made his lunches through high school, pressed his shirts before interviews, paid for LSAT prep out of her own dental fund. She had one root canal pushed back 2 years just so she could cover his textbook deposit. And she never once complained. That's what mothers did, right? You give so your kids don't have to feel the struggle you knew too well. It wasn't until years later that she realized Jared had stopped asking how she was. It didn't happen in one dramatic moment. It crept in slowly, texts with fewer words, birthday calls that felt more like reminders, visits where he looked at his phone more than her. But she still dressed up when she saw him. She still cooked his favorite meals, even when he pushed the plate aside and said he was watching carbs. Last year on Mother's Day, Beatrice didn't get a call. She told herself it was okay. Maybe they were busy. Maybe it was just a hard day. She walked to the park alone and sat by the fountain where she used to take Jared when he was 5. There was a young boy there that day, chasing ducks and laughing. She closed her eyes, and for a second, she could hear Jared's tiny voice again, calling her mommy with sticky fingers and muddy shoes. This year, when the card came in the mail, she didn't expect much. A pale envelope, Jared's neat handwriting. Inside, a short note. Hope you can come to brunch at our place this year. Chloe's mom will be there, too. Should be nice. No happy Mother's Day. No love you, Mom. Just logistics. But Beatrice, ever the optimist, still ironed her best blouse and polished the locket Charlie gave her back in '76. She placed a single framed photo of Jared from his law school graduation into a small gift bag, along with a handwritten note that simply said, "You always made me proud, even when you didn't know it." She caught the 8:40 a.m. bus across town. Jared lived in a modern condo now. Glass panels, motion lights, everything sleek and minimal. The kind of place Beatrice had only seen in magazines. She held her purse tightly as she walked up the stone steps. There were balloons tied to the mailbox and a wreath that read, "World's Best Mom." For a moment, her heart fluttered. Maybe things were different this year. Maybe Jared had remembered more than just to invite her. The door opened before she could knock. "Oh, hi, Beatrice," Chloe said, smiling in that smooth, practiced way she always did. "You made it. My mom's already here. Come in." Beatrice stepped into the scent of lavender candles and something too expensive for breakfast. She followed the voices to the kitchen and saw Jared laughing with Chloe's brother, looking relaxed, polished, happy. He hadn't noticed her yet. At the kitchen island were name cards. Chloe's mother, Diane, sat in the center with a mimosa in hand. Beatrice's place was off to the side, next to a stack of paper napkins and a disposable cup. Her name was spelled Beatrice. No one corrected it. No one noticed. She sat, folding her hands in her lap. Her gift bag sat quietly by her feet. Diane opened a velvet box and gasped. Inside was a white gold necklace with a sapphire pendant. Jared leaned over and kissed her cheek. "Figured you deserve something real this year, Cest," he said. Everyone clapped. Beatrice sipped her water. Nobody looked her way. She didn't speak. Not because she didn't have words, but because she had learned over time which silences meant the most. The napkin at Beatrice's seat was already stained, not from her, but from someone's careless hand before she sat down. No one noticed. No one offered to switch it out. She took it quietly, folded it smaller, and placed it beneath her water glass like she had always done. Tidy, unobtrusive, easy to ignore. Across the kitchen, Chloe was laughing, loudly, purposefully, while helping her mother unwrap another gift, a 2-week vacation to Italy, airfare and hotel included. Jared stood behind them, smiling like a proud host. Cameras clicked. Beatrice was not asked to be in any photo. She looked down at the gift bag she brought, small, thoughtful, wrapped in soft blue paper. Inside, the photo of Jared at age 4 with birthday cake on his cheeks. She had even written the year on the back in her careful, looping handwriting. It sat unopened under her chair. Finally, Jared walked over, hands in his pockets. "Hey," he said, like they were passing in the grocery store, not celebrating a lifetime of motherhood. He handed her a small envelope. Inside was a $20 gift card to a local cafe and a pink plastic keychain that said, "Best Grandma" in glitter font. Beatrice smiled softly, not from joy, but from habit. "Thanks," she said. "Hope it's useful," he replied, already looking back toward Chloe. She tucked the card into her purse, felt the cheap keychain dig into her fingers. It still had the barcode sticker on it. No one asked her to open her gift aloud. No one clapped. The next hour passed in fragments, laughter she wasn't part of, stories she didn't know, a toast that didn't mention her. Someone put music on. Too loud for conversation, but just right to drown out discomfort. She noticed the table setting, how Diane's glass was crystal while hers was plastic, how everyone had cloth napkins except for her, how Chloe kept saying, "our moms," while only ever touching Diane's hand. There's a certain kind of pain that doesn't scream. It just quietly folds itself smaller and smaller until it fits into a plastic chair at the edge of a room you helped build. After a while, Beatrice stood. No one stopped her. She walked toward the patio for air, pausing by a photo collage near the hallway. Jared's milestones filled the frame. High school, law school, his wedding. Not a single picture had her in it. Just then, Chloe's voice drifted from the hallway behind her. "She's just tired. That's what happens at that age. We're doing what's best, trust me." Someone murmured agreement. Beatrice stepped back into the kitchen, picked up her coat and stood near the front door. Jared noticed. "Oh, you leaving already?" "It's getting late," she said, though it wasn't. Didn't want to take up too much space. He nodded. "We've got people coming later anyway." No offer to walk her out, no hug, just a casual drive safe. She opened the door herself. The sun had begun to dip behind the condos. Orange shadows stretched across the lawn. The gift bag swung gently in her hand as she stepped outside. The rideshare hadn't arrived yet, so she stood alone near the curb. The silence wrapped around her, not cold, not warm, just hollow. And here's where I want to pause for a moment. If you're watching this and you've ever felt like the invisible one in the room, the one who gave everything and still ended up outside holding a gift no one asked for, I want you to know this: you're not alone. Leave a comment, even if it's just a heart. Sometimes we don't need advice. We just need to be seen. The car finally pulled up. Beatrice slid into the back seat. The driver nodded without speaking and turned up the radio. The hum of the road filled the space where conversation should have lived. She stared out the window, passing homes with curtains drawn, porches lit gently with the kind of light that says, someone's expected here. Back at her apartment, the hallway light flickered like it always did. She hung her coat, placed the gift bag on the counter, and stood for a long moment in her kitchen. Her place was small, yes, but it was hers. The kind of home that held memories in every corner. Charlie's coffee mug still sat on the shelf. Jared's kindergarten painting still hung crooked on the wall. She reached into the fridge and pulled out 2 boiled eggs, set them on the table, sat down. The chair across from her stayed empty, as it had for years. She didn't eat, she didn't cry, she just sat, hands folded like she did at the brunch. Because sometimes the biggest betrayals don't come with shouting. They come dressed in brunch invitations and glitter keychains. And the deepest kind of grief? It doesn't always need a funeral. It just needs silence. The next morning was gray, quiet, the kind of overcast that made everything feel just a little heavier. Beatrice walked home from the pharmacy with a small white bag of refilled prescriptions. Nothing urgent, just the usual blood pressure pills she'd taken for years. She almost turned left at the corner near the lake, like she used to, for the long way home. But something tugged at her. Habit, maybe. Or instinct. She passed Jared's building. It wasn't planned. She hadn't called, but yesterday's brunch still sat in her chest like unfinished business. She had forgotten her scarf in their guest bathroom. That much was true. But part of her just needed to see something real, something unfiltered. The side window near the kitchen was cracked open slightly, and as she approached, voices floated out. Chloe's voice was sharp, low but clear. He needs to sign those papers today. We can't risk delays, especially with her still in the picture. Beatrice froze. Her body didn't move, but her heart started racing. There was a pause, then Chloe again. She won't be around much longer anyway. He keeps saying she's frail. It'll all settle itself before summer if we're lucky. The words didn't hit like a slap. They sank like ice, slow, spreading. Beatrice backed away from the window, her hand still clutching the pharmacy bag. Her scarf was the last thing on her mind now. She turned the corner, leaned against the hallway wall, and tried to breathe. She had spent her entire life reading between the lines, filing witness statements, sitting through court depositions, understanding what people meant even when they didn't say it directly. And this wasn't frustration. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a plan. For years, Beatrice had believed in second chances. She had excused the short visits, the clipped texts, the awkward silences. She thought maybe Jared was just overwhelmed. Maybe Chloe didn't know better. Maybe the world was just changing faster than she could keep up with. But now she saw it for what it was. She sat at the bus stop without knowing where she was going. A bus pulled up, opened its doors. She didn't get on. Back home, she set the pharmacy bag on the kitchen counter without opening it. Her eyes were dry, but her throat burned. She moved through her apartment like it wasn't hers anymore, like the walls had watched something shift and didn't know what to do about it. She reached into the drawer where she kept Charlie's old things. There, under a stack of Christmas cards and warranty slips, was the metal tin. She hadn't touched it in years. It was where she kept copies of old documents, extra keys, their marriage license, things that once seemed over-prepared, maybe even a little paranoid. Charlie had insisted. Just in case, he'd say. You never know who we'll have to protect you from. She placed the tin on the table. The metal was cold, like it remembered. Inside, the original deed to her condo, their wills from 2005, her retirement paperwork, and then, folded neatly, something she didn't recognize, a power of attorney document. Beatrice's name was at the top, Jared's name listed as the agent. The signature at the bottom looked like hers. But the date, only 6 months ago, and something felt wrong. The curve of the B in her name was slightly off. The pressure of the pen didn't match. There was no notary stamp. She scanned every line. It stated Jared had the right to make decisions on her behalf, including all financial and property-related matters. She had never signed this, not knowingly, and certainly not legally. Another document was clipped behind it, a trust account with Jared listed as the sole beneficiary and manager, a trust she hadn't created. Beatrice flipped back to older documents, one signed with Charlie decades ago. Those clearly showed joint ownership between them. No mention of Jared, no trust, no power of attorney. She sat back in her chair, the weight of it all pressing into her chest. This wasn't neglect. This was orchestration. Silent. Precise. She found a letter Charlie had written before his passing. She remembered him slipping it into the tin, just in case. It was in his handwriting, still steady and strong. If you ever feel like you're disappearing, don't. You built this life. You earned every inch of it. Protect it, and protect yourself." Her fingers trembled. They thought she wouldn't notice, that she wouldn't understand the language of fine print anymore, that she'd forgotten where things were kept, that she'd simply nod along and sign. Beatrice stood slowly, went to the kitchen drawer, and pulled out a yellow notepad. She began to write, not emotionally, methodically, names, dates, document titles, discrepancies. Words like inconsistent and unauthorized flowed from her pen like a woman who had waited just long enough. They had underestimated her. They had counted on her kindness, her silence, her age. But Beatrice had spent a lifetime listening in courtrooms, watching lies unfold in slow, quiet ways. And now, she wasn't just a mother anymore. She was a witness. The morning after she opened the tin box, Beatrice woke before the sun, not because of an alarm or the usual stiffness in her knees, but because her mind simply wouldn't rest. The world outside hadn't changed. It was still gray and damp, the kind of spring morning that smelled faintly of old rain and new weeds. But something inside her had shifted. It wasn't panic. Not quite. It was clarity. Cold and exact. She sat at her kitchen table with a cup of coffee gone cold before it ever reached her lips. The documents were still spread out in front of her. The fake power of attorney, the trust forms with Jared's name on them, the copies of the deed that had once listed both her and Charlie, and now listed neither. Everything that made her life hers was on those pages. She wasn't angry. Not in the way people imagine. There were no shaking fists, no broken dishes, just the weight of knowing. They did this because they thought she wouldn't notice. She pulled out a small magnifying glass from the drawer, the kind Charlie used to use when reading old maps. She examined the signature again. Her name was spelled correctly, yes. But the M in Monroe had a rounded curve, not the sharp, looping point she always made. The angle of the B in Beatrice leaned too far left. Someone had practiced it. Enough to fake confidence, not enough to hide intention. She flipped to the last page of the document. The notary section was blank. No stamp, no witness, just a faint crease where a seal should have been. That was when she knew, not just suspected, but knew this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was fabrication. Quiet, sophisticated, done with the assumption that Beatrice wouldn't dig, wouldn't question, wouldn't know how to fight. But they had forgotten who she was. She had spent decades sitting through hearings, transcribing witness testimonies, flagging inconsistencies in legal statements. She had typed faster than some lawyers could speak. She had read faces for a living, watched as liars blinked too much or too little, as people folded their hands to hide guilt or shuffled in their seats when their stories didn't add up. She wasn't just a mother. She was trained to notice. And now, everything inside her that had once gone quiet, the instincts, the sharpness, the precise awareness, woke back up like an old machine plugged back into power. She opened a manila folder from the back of the box and found a sheet with Charlie's old notes, budget logs, bank account numbers, and in the margins a line he had written in blue ink. Keep everything traceable, even if one day it's just you. Beatrice reached for a fresh notepad. On the first page, she wrote in bold letters, timeline, financial plus legal changes. Last 12 months, she began listing everything she remembered. When the gas bill started arriving in Jared's name. When her property tax notice went digital, something she never requested. When her Medicare plan was switched to a different provider. When Jared insisted she use his office's assistant to help her with paperwork. When Chloe offered to streamline her bank statements. None of it had seemed malicious at the time, just helpful, thoughtful even. She had believed them, and that's what cut the deepest. Not that they forged her name or moved her money, but that they had done it while hugging her, while smiling, while handing her cheap gifts and calling it love. She made a list of all the institutions she'd need to call. Banks, tax offices, her credit union, the county clerk's office. She knew it wouldn't be easy and it wouldn't be fast. But the only thing worse than being erased was sitting still while it happened. Later that afternoon, she changed clothes and combed her hair. She wore her old courthouse blazer, the one that still held the scent of paper and copier ink. The sleeves were tighter than she remembered, but it still buttoned. She stared at herself in the mirror. The face looking back wasn't the one who used to stay up proofreading affidavits past midnight, but it wasn't weak either. She stepped out into the cool air and walked 3 blocks to the library, where she printed 5 copies of every document she had questions about. The printer hummed steadily, and for the first time in weeks, the sound comforted her. She made herself a folder, labeled it in capital letters. Evidence, personal property rights, BM. Back home, she filed the documents, wiped the kitchen table, and sat down again. She stared at the envelope that held Jared's gift from Mother's Day, the $20 coffee card and the pink heart keychain. She opened it. She placed the keychain gently on the table. Then, with a pair of scissors, she snipped off the little silver ring that held it together. The heart fell flat, not in anger, in ceremony. Then she reached into the cupboard, pulled out Charlie's old mug, and poured herself a new cup of coffee. Hot this time. Strong. She held the warmth between her hands and closed her eyes. She was no longer hoping Jared would apologize, or that Chloe would see what she had done. That hope had packed its bags and left some time between the fake signature and the missing notary stamp. She was no longer asking to be part of anything. She was remembering who she was before she forgot. Beatrice didn't storm into any offices. She didn't confront Jared. She didn't leave voicemails or write long, furious letters. That wasn't her way, not anymore. Instead, she made a list, then another, then a schedule. Monday through Friday, she carved out 2 hours each morning, after her first coffee, before her second, for what she called her quiet work. It started with the tax office. She walked in with her evidence folder, asked for a property records officer, and politely requested to review the deed transfer on her condo. The clerk, a young man with anxious eyes, tried to explain it was all digital now. Beatrice smiled, leaned forward, and slid the document across the counter. "This signature," she said softly, "isn't mine." That afternoon, she filed a fraud complaint. Quietly. No drama. Just dates, facts, her real signature, and a sworn affidavit. The next day, she called her bank and requested to speak directly with a branch manager. She had the original joint account papers, the trust documents, and a printed history of her statements, highlighted. By Thursday, her medical records were corrected. Her Medicare provider had been switched without her consent. She explained calmly that the new plan listed Jared as her caretaker, something she never requested. The rep apologized 3 times. Beatrice never raised her voice. She was rebuilding what they tried to erase. Week by week, she quietly peeled back the layers of manipulation like old wallpaper. Beneath each layer was something she recognized: her name, her choices, her voice. She canceled the automatic transfer Chloe had set up from her retirement account. She updated her will. She reestablished herself as sole owner of her condo and moved the deed into a trust with her name only. One she created this time. No fanfare, no social media declarations, just facts, just protection. One day, she stopped by the old courthouse where she used to work. The security guard at the door still remembered her. "Beatrice Monroe? No way." He laughed, standing up straighter. "You look great." She chuckled. "Don't lie, Carl. But thanks." He let her through. No questions asked. She sat in the back row of a courtroom for half an hour, listening to a hearing about tenant rights. It wasn't her case, but it reminded her who she was. The steady rhythm of arguments, the measured tones, the tension beneath the civility, it all felt like home. Later, in the hallway, she saw one of the newer attorneys fumbling with her files. Beatrice stepped in, helped her organize them by order of submission. "Thanks," the woman said, breathless. Were you a clerk here?" Beatrice smiled. "Something like that." At home, the light came in softer than before. The corners of her apartment no longer felt like places to wait, but places to plan. She cleared out drawers, shredded old bills, bought a new planner. She started baking again. Nothing fancy, just her late husband's favorite oatmeal cookies. She brought a batch to her neighbor down the hall, a retired mechanic named Pete, who always offered to fix her screen door, but never asked for anything in return. They talked about weather, bad knees, good music. She didn't mention Jared. She didn't mention Chloe. Not because she was hiding anything, but because they no longer lived at the center of her life. One afternoon, Jared called. His name blinked on the screen 3 times before she answered. "Hey, Mom," he said, voice smooth. "Just checking in. Haven't heard from you." She paused, then said, "I've been busy." "Busy?" "Reclaiming things." A long silence. "Look," he said finally. "About the paperwork. Chloe said it was just to make things easier, for everyone." "It made things easier for you," she replied, calm as ever. "Not for me." Another pause. "Are you upset?" "No," she said and meant it. "Not anymore." "Well, if you ever want to come over, Chloe's making that chicken you like next weekend. Diane'll be there too." Beatrice stared out the window. The sunset was stretching across the buildings like soft gold. "I'll think about it," she said. She didn't. Instead, she spent that weekend sorting through her photo albums, not to cry, but to remember, and to reclaim the narrative. She pulled out the graduation photos where Jared had smiled wide while she stood in the background, holding a bouquet no one mentioned. She scanned it into her computer, cropped the frame, and zoomed in, not on him, but on herself. She printed it and pinned it above her desk, a reminder that she was there, that she always had been. Later, she visited the public library and signed up to audit a local law course, just 1 night a week. The instructor welcomed her warmly. She didn't speak much, but when she did, her words were precise. She remembered everything. People began to nod when she spoke, and by the 5th week, they started writing it down. Beatrice never announced what had happened to her. She never outed Jared, never sought sympathy. She didn't need applause. She needed ground under her feet, and now she had it again. She had been erased in silence, but now, in quieter ways, she was writing herself back in. Spring melted into early summer, and with it came a kind of warmth Beatrice hadn't felt in years, not from the sun, but from inside herself. Her days had become quiet, purposeful, calm. She woke early, brewed her coffee slowly, and opened her curtains wide. Not because she was expecting anyone, but because she had nothing to hide. The papers had been corrected. Her name was once again listed on everything she owned. The fraudulent documents were flagged and under investigation. Her new trust was solid, ironclad. She had taken back what was hers and done so without a single scream. She hadn't spoken to Jared in weeks. He had stopped calling after she didn't show up for the second invitation to dinner. He didn't follow up. Chloe never sent a message. And for once, Beatrice didn't wonder why. She no longer looked at the phone, hoping it would ring. She no longer checked her mailbox for late birthday cards or forgotten thank you notes. Instead, she joined a local writing group at the library. Just 5 older women who shared coffee, stories, and laughter that echoed off the old wooden tables. She never told them about Jared, but when she read a short essay about a woman who kept showing up for people who'd stopped showing up for her, the room fell quiet. One of the women reached across the table and touched her hand. That was enough. Then, one morning, a letter arrived. Not typed. Not from a lawyer, just Jared's messy handwriting on the envelope. Inside was a note on plain white paper. "Mom, I saw the trust was updated. I figured you'd figured it out. I guess I always assumed you'd just let it go. I don't know if what we did is unforgivable, but I know you didn't deserve it. I think about it more than I say. I'm sorry. Jay." There was no return address, no follow-up, just those few uneven lines folded once down the middle. Beatrice read it twice, then folded it back, placed it in the drawer where she kept her own writing. She didn't cry. She didn't rush to reply. She simply whispered, "Too late," and meant it without bitterness. That weekend, the local community center held a small celebration for volunteers and contributors. One of the women from her writing group had nominated Beatrice. quietly for her help with local legal literacy, explaining court papers to elderly residents, helping a few neighbors understand their Medicare changes. Nothing dramatic, but something real. They called her name last, after the music had faded and the lemonade had gone warm. Beatrice stood slowly. There was a gentle applause, not loud, not performative, just enough to feel like a soft embrace. Someone handed her a small plaque that read, "In quiet service, Beatrice Monroe." She held it, not for the recognition, but for the fact that her name, her real name, was still hers. As she sat back down, a woman beside her leaned in and whispered, "You helped my sister last month. She couldn't stop talking about you, said you were the first person in weeks who made her feel smart again." Beatrice smiled, not politely, genuinely. Later that night, she walked home alone. The air was cool, the sky clear. Stars blinked above the rooftops like quiet reminders that some things, truth, time, dignity, shine best in silence. She unlocked her apartment, stepped inside, and looked around. Same chair, same curtains. But it felt different now. It felt earned. She sat by her kitchen table, opened her notebook, and started writing again. But this time, she didn't write about loss. She wrote about power. Not the loud kind, not the kind that takes, but the kind that quietly keeps. The kind that wakes up every morning, even after being pushed aside, and chooses not to disappear. And if you're watching this and thinking, that could have been me, maybe it already is. Maybe you've been erased quietly, made to feel small, replaced in rooms you helped build. If that's you, just know, you're not invisible here. Leave A if you've ever rebuilt yourself in silence. I'll be reading. The camera might fade now. But in Beatrice's world, things are just beginning. She didn't win by yelling. She didn't win by begging. She won by remembering who she was, when no one else did. And that, perhaps, is the loudest victory of all. It had been nearly 3 months since Beatrice had last seen Jared in person. The letter he sent had stayed in her drawer, folded neatly beneath her writing notebook. She hadn't mentioned it to anyone, not because she was hiding it, but because it didn't change anything. A sorry, written in past tense, didn't restore what had been slowly stolen. And yet, one Wednesday afternoon, an envelope appeared on her doormat again, thicker this time, ivory paper, her name written in gold ink, inside, an invitation. You are cordially invited to celebrate the 5th anniversary of Monroe Strategies, hosted by Jared Monroe and Chloe Hastings Cocktail Attire. 6 p.m. in the Foundry, downtown Bridgeport. There was a line scribbled at the bottom in Jared's handwriting. "Would love to see you there, Mom. Things are different now." Beatrice sat down in her armchair and held the envelope for a long time. Her first instinct was to laugh, dry, silent, not out of humor, but disbelief. Things were different? What did that mean? That Chloe now smiled when she manipulated? That the betrayal had been upgraded from casual to ceremonial? She placed the invitation on the coffee table, beside the latest edition of her legal literacy pamphlet, the one she'd co-written with 2 other retirees, and then she stood up, walked to her bedroom, and opened her closet. There it was, the slate gray dress she'd worn only once before, to Charlie's retirement dinner. Simple, elegant, with a soft collar that framed her neck like she still meant something. She took it out and laid it on the bed. Beatrice didn't go for revenge, but that didn't mean she wouldn't show up. Saturday evening, the Foundry glowed with polished brass and shallow laughter. Servers in black ties floated between groups of people holding champagne flutes and talking about campaigns and conversions and market reach. Beatrice entered quietly. No spotlight, no announcement. Her heels tapped gently across the polished floor. A few heads turned, unsure if they recognized her. Chloe definitely didn't. She was mid-sentence at the bar, laughing with a group of women in identical heels. Jared, however, did. His smile faltered the second he saw her. "Mom," he said, stepping forward too quickly. "You came." "I got your invitation," she replied. Not cold, but not warm either. He opened his mouth to say something else, but didn't. "You look great," he added. "I always did," she said calmly. "You just stopped looking." They stood there for a beat too long. People nearby drifted away. He gestured toward the crowd. "This whole thing, it's been a lot. I'm glad you're here." She nodded. "I'm not staying long, but I wanted to see it." "See what?" "How it feels to be honored for building something." He looked away. A woman with a clipboard approached. "Mr. Monroe, we need your final speech in 5. He nodded, turning back. "Will you stay for the toast?" Beatrice looked around. The floral centerpieces, the string quartet, the slideshow looping photos of Jared and Chloe, always perfectly curated. Nothing raw, nothing real. "No," she said gently. "I have somewhere else to be." Jared blinked. "Another party?" Beatrice smiled faintly. "No, just somewhere people still know my name without needing to be reminded." She turned before he could say more, her steps quiet but certain. Outside, the air was cool. She took a deep breath, letting the night settle in her lungs. She didn't need an audience. She didn't need closure in the form of clinking glasses. She needed only one thing. To walk away by choice. She arrived at the library 20 minutes later. The back meeting room was already half full. The writing group had invited a few neighbors to hear members read their personal essays aloud. Folding chairs lined the carpeted floor. A card table held a tray of brownies someone had made too sweet, but no one complained. When it was Beatrice's turn, she walked up to the podium with no script, just a note card with a single word: belonging. She spoke not about Jared or Chloe or stolen signatures, but about silence. About how the most dangerous kind of forgetting is the kind that happens in rooms filled with people who claim to love you. She ended her piece like this: "Some people will only love the version of you that stays quiet. That lets them take and take until there's nothing left. But when you stop offering your silence, when you simply stop showing up to be erased, that's not revenge. That's freedom." The room was still. Then came soft claps, not thunderous, but real. And in that small room, under library lights and beside a tray of crumbling brownies, Beatrice received the only recognition she had ever truly needed. The library reading ended with a small round of claps and the rustling of coats being gathered. Beatrice stood near the snack table, sipping weak lemonade and politely refusing a third brownie. A woman named June, who always wore bright floral scarves, touched her elbow. "I wish I had your courage," June whispered. "The way you spoke. I don't know if I could ever say something like that out loud." Beatrice smiled. "You just haven't been pushed far enough yet." They both laughed, quiet and tired, like people who had carried more than they ever told anyone. Later that evening, Beatrice walked home slowly. There was no rush. No one was waiting up, no dinner to reheat. But for the first time in years, that silence didn't feel like a punishment. It felt like room, space to breathe, space to be. She thought about how different it all felt now. Not just her apartment, but her days. She had filled them with people who didn't want anything from her. No money, no power of attorney, no unearned praise. They just wanted her presence, her words, her kindness. In some ways they were strangers, in others they were family in the truest sense. One of the younger volunteers at the library, a woman named Mel, had asked Beatrice to help her navigate a guardianship hearing for her disabled aunt. They met twice a week over coffee, Beatrice explaining court language, showing her how to flag red flags in medical power documents. Another man, Robert, gray hair, strong back, quiet eyes, had started walking Beatrice home after library events. He never insisted, just lingered until she stood, then asked gently, "Shall we?" They didn't talk much, but their silences weren't empty. They were restful. Beatrice realized she didn't miss Jared anymore, or maybe she missed who she thought he was. But that boy was gone. Or buried deep under a man who let others speak for him, who looked the other way while the woman who raised him disappeared from her own story. And Beatrice, she had no more energy for pretending to be wanted in rooms that didn't have a chair for her. One Sunday afternoon, as she trimmed the dead leaves off her spider plant, her neighbor Pete knocked on her door holding a bag of groceries. Gotta buy one, get one on pork chops, he said, and I live alone, so unless I want a heart attack by Tuesday, I need help eating them. Beatrice smiled. You're in luck. I still remember how to make stuffing from scratch. They ate together, watched a rerun of Jeopardy. She beat him in final round, and he accused her of having courthouse memory. He was right. She had learned to remember details because no one else would. Because when you're a woman who no longer fits what the world calls useful, remembering becomes a form of survival, a way to say, I was here, I know what happened, and I will not let you rewrite it. After dinner, as Pete washed the dishes and she dried them, he asked, Do you ever hear from your son? Beatrice didn't flinch. He sent me an invitation and a letter. That all? That's enough. She didn't elaborate, because sometimes you don't owe the full story. Sometimes the power is in what you no longer feel the need to explain. The next week, the writing group met again. June had written a short poem. Mel brought homemade cornbread. Beatrice, for the first time, didn't write anything. Instead, she listened. She gave her attention fully without worrying about what came next. After the meeting, Robert handed her a folded sheet of paper. You said you liked that poem by Mary Oliver, he said. This one reminded me of you. She opened it when she got home. To live in this world, you must be able to do 3 things. To love what is mortal. To hold it against your bones, knowing your own life depends on it. And when the time comes to let it go, to let it go. Beatrice read it twice. Then again. She placed it on the fridge with the magnet shaped like a coffee mug that said, Fierce Women Read. It wasn't dramatic, what she had done. She hadn't burned bridges or screamed in lobbies. She had simply walked away from the people who forgot her worth and walked toward the ones who never needed a reminder. Sometimes family is blood, and sometimes it's a neighbor with extra pork chops, a woman with shaky hands reading poetry, or a quiet man who walks you home without needing to speak. And maybe, just maybe, that kind of family is the one you get to choose. Beatrice hadn't planned to return to the house. But when the envelope from the city assessor's office arrived with the final ownership confirmation, her name reinstated as sole title holder, it triggered something she couldn't ignore. For months, she'd been untangling the mess quietly, fixing, restoring, reclaiming. But there was one thing she hadn't faced: the house. The one she and Charlie had bought together when Jared was 5, the one with the oak tree out front, and the crooked mailbox he used to run to barefoot. It had been rented out the past few years, but it was finally vacant, and now, legally and truly, hers again. She took the spare key from the drawer, the one labeled Old House in faded ink, drove out on a Tuesday afternoon. No one knew. She didn't tell her writing group, not even Pete. The driveway still had the cracks Charlie refused to fix because he liked the character. The front porch leaned slightly, just enough to make it groan when she stepped up. She pushed open the door. Dust clung to the air like memory. Beatrice stood in the entryway, breathing it in. It smelled like wood and time. She walked slowly, letting her fingers trail across the banister, the door frames, the wallpaper she once hated but never changed because Jared loved the little blue leaves. In the kitchen, she found a nail still in the wall where the calendar used to hang. She remembered writing Jared's school events in blue, Charlie's meetings in red, and her own appointments, dentist, grocery, book club, in pencil, because hers could always be erased. She sat at the old table, surprised it hadn't been taken by renters. It was the same one she'd folded laundry on, sorted bills at, written apology notes for things she never should have apologized for. She pulled out a chair and sat down, and cried. Not the loud, heaving kind, just tears that came steady and full, like they'd been waiting at the door this whole time. The past wasn't a thing you could burn down or bury. Sometimes you had to walk through it slowly, room by room, and let it look you in the eye. She opened the back closet, still stacked with dusty board games and half-empty paint cans. On the top shelf, shoved between old shoe boxes, was a folder marked Mom's Letters. She froze. Carefully, she pulled it down. Inside, dozens of envelopes, birthday cards she'd written Jared in college, notes tucked into his luggage when he first moved out, even a Mother's Day card from years ago, one she'd written herself and left on his table when he forgot. He'd kept them, never said a word. She sat on the floor and read each one, her own words, younger and softer, reaching across time like a voice she barely recognized. One letter read, "No matter how far you go, I'll always be proud of you. Just don't forget, someone back home still thinks the sun rises and sets with your name." And maybe that was the problem. She had believed too deeply in someone who never truly looked back. But now, she wasn't asking for anything, not recognition, not return, just release. As she locked up and stepped off the porch, she looked back at the house once more. It didn't feel like hers anymore, not in the way it used to, and that was okay. Back in her apartment that night, she placed the Mom's Letters folder in her writing box, not as evidence, as record. Later, she sat with a cup of tea, staring at the photo on her wall, cropped to show her face clearly, finally. And maybe this is a good time to ask you, whoever's watching or listening, have you ever walked back into a place that once held your whole heart, only to realize you don't live there anymore? If you have, leave an emoji below. Let's remind each other, we're allowed to outgrow the rooms that never grew with us, because some returns aren't about reclaiming, they're about releasing. It started with a voicemail. Beatrice hadn't checked them in weeks, not because she was avoiding anything, but because she no longer expected anyone to say something worth hearing. But that morning, as she brewed her coffee and passed her phone on the counter, the little red icon caught her eye. One message. From Jared. She pressed play. "Hi, Mom. I heard you've been back to the house. I didn't know you were even still dealing with all that stuff. I guess I figured it was settled. I think about the way things turned out, a lot. Chloe says I should just let it go, that you've moved on. But I don't know, maybe we could talk. No pressure, just maybe." Beatrice let the message end. The silence after his voice felt heavier than the words themselves. She didn't call back. That afternoon, she went to the park down the street, sat on her usual bench, and watched the ducks skim across the surface of the pond. It was a small thing, but she'd come to appreciate these moments. The slow ones, the ones that didn't need fixing or navigating. And while she sat there, she thought not about Jared's voice or Chloe's name or what they did. She thought about all the times she had not spoken, all the times she had swallowed her needs, quieted her hurt, softened her anger just to keep the peace. Peace. What a strange word. So often confused with silence. That voicemail wasn't an olive branch, it was a tug, a quiet attempt to keep her tethered to a dynamic she no longer belonged to. Not because she hated Jared, but because she no longer allowed herself to be someone he could turn to only when it suited him. Back home, she opened her writing notebook and scribbled 3 words. "You don't owe." She underlined them twice. That night, Robert dropped by with a new poetry book. He'd found it at the thrift store. Thought of her when he saw the title, "The Women Who Stayed Standing." She smiled when he handed it over. "You know," she said, "I think I finally know what that means." They sat quietly in her kitchen, sharing slices of leftover apple tart from the senior center potluck. He didn't ask about her son, and she didn't feel the need to explain why she looked tired in a different kind of way. The next day, she wrote Jared a letter, not out of guilt, not to mend something, but to end it. "Dear Jared, I got your voicemail. I appreciate you thinking of me. I want you to know I've rebuilt a life I'm proud of. It doesn't include blame, but it also doesn't include the old expectations. I hope you're well, I truly do, but I'm no longer in waiting mode. Mom." She didn't sign "with love." She didn't ask for a reply. She didn't reread it before sealing the envelope. 3 days later, she dropped it in the mailbox on the corner. As it clinked into the steel drop box, something shifted. Not dramatically, not like a scene in a movie, just a subtle click in her chest. That was it. The last thread had been cut, not with scissors, not with fire, but with clarity. And maybe that's the most powerful kind of ending, the one that's not loud, the one no one claps for, the one that doesn't need an audience. Just a woman choosing her own quiet. That weekend, the community center hosted a Small Lives, Big Stories event where volunteers shared their life chapters through spoken word or song. Beatrice didn't perform. She sat in the third row, nodding quietly, smiling when others faltered and kept going. At the end, a young woman read a piece about her estranged mother and how she always wished for just one more real conversation. Beatrice listened carefully, and when it ended, she clapped with both hands, her eyes wet, not from regret, but from the recognition of choosing not to wait for a call that may never come. She had called herself home, and this time, no one could uninvite her. Beatrice's mornings had taken on a quiet rhythm. She'd wake up without an alarm, stretch in bed for a moment, then rise to open the window and let in the breeze. The light that streamed in didn't feel harsh anymore. It felt earned. On Tuesdays, she walked to the corner bakery and bought exactly 2 scones, one for herself, one for June, who always arrived 5 minutes later like clockwork. They didn't plan it. It had just become routine. 2 women who once felt invisible now seen in each other's presence. Wednesdays were for library work, sorting pamphlets, helping seniors fill out basic forms, nothing glamorous. But when people thanked her, she didn't flinch or shrug it off anymore. She just smiled and said, "You're welcome." Like it was normal. Like she finally believed she deserved to be thanked. Thursday nights, she'd started attending a poetry group with Robert. He didn't write, but he listened well, and he laughed in all the right places. Sometimes they walked home together in silence. Other times, he'd tell her about his late wife or the way he'd once dreamed of running a bookstore. She never pushed him to say more, and maybe that's why he did. Her life, once built around service to others who forgot her, had been reconstructed from within, not loudly, not perfectly, but patiently. She'd gotten into the habit of writing letters she never sent. To Charlie, to Jared, even to Chloe once. Letters where she poured out what she could never say face to face, then folded them up and placed them in a little box marked "Let Go." Some afternoons, she'd sit by the window with a cup of mint tea, open the box, and reread 1 or 2, not to dwell, just to remind herself how far she'd come. She didn't miss the version of herself who begged to be included. She didn't miss the woman who measured her worth by someone else's gratitude. She had outgrown that life, like a dress that no longer fit, no matter how pretty it once was. One Saturday, the community center threw a spring celebration for neighborhood volunteers. Beatrice helped set up the chairs and make the punch. No one introduced her as Jared Monroe's mother or the woman who used to live in that big house. She wasn't anyone's mother, wife, or dependent. She was just Beatrice, who showed up, who helped, who mattered. Mel from the writing group stood up to give a small thank you speech and surprised everyone by holding up a framed certificate. "This isn't official or fancy," she said, "but I think it's overdue. Beatrice Monroe, thank you for being our quiet anchor. You help more people than you know." The room clapped. Beatrice didn't cry. She smiled, deep, unapologetic. After the event, Robert walked her home. The air was cool, spring finally settling in like it planned to stay. Outside her apartment building, he paused. "You ever think you'd be here? Like this?" he asked. Beatrice looked at the trees, the streetlight, the life she now recognized as hers. "Not really," she said, "but I'm glad I am." He nodded. "It suits you." They said goodnight like always, uncomplicated, without need for more. That night, Beatrice sat at her desk and wrote something she hadn't written in a long time. A new first page. Not a letter, not a memory, a story. She didn't know what it would become. Maybe a short piece, maybe a memoir. But she wrote the opening line with certainty. "I stopped in asking to be remembered the day I remembered myself." She leaned back, exhaled. There was no applause, no one rushing to call or clap or congratulate her. And she didn't need them to, because this new life, this quiet, grounded, self-built life, wasn't about proving anyone wrong. It was about proving herself right. The library was unusually busy that morning. A new shipment of large print books had arrived, and the volunteers were all buzzing about where to shelve them. Beatrice, now something of a fixture in the building, was cataloging donations at the back table when June hurried over. "There's someone asking for you at the front desk," June whispered, a little breathless. "Says it's about the community project." Beatrice stood, brushing the dust from her skirt. When she rounded the corner, a young woman with thick glasses and a canvas tote stepped forward. "Hi, Ms. Monroe. I'm Clara. I'm from the City Arts Program. We're starting an oral history archive for the area. Stories from people who've lived here shaped it. Your name came up more than once." Beatrice blinked. "My name?" Clara smiled. "Yeah. People said you were the one to talk to, that you've got stories that matter." For a moment, Beatrice didn't know what to say. Her mind jumped back years, standing at Jared's graduation, being introduced as his mom. Never by her own name, or worse, just ignored, as if she were air. Now here was this woman, this stranger, saying the words she had once begged to hear. "You matter. Your voice matters." She nodded. "I'd be honored." Over the next few weeks, Clara returned often, with a recorder and a notebook and questions that were both simple and profound. What do you wish someone had told you when you were 40? What moment in your life felt like a turning point? Who taught you the most about yourself? Beatrice didn't answer all at once. Some stories she let simmer. Some came out easily. Tales of her time in city court, the old duplex on Fairview Street, the day she met Charlie. Others were harder. The Christmas Jared didn't call, the morning she found herself staring at a blank mirror, realizing no one was coming to knock. But through it all, she spoke not with bitterness, but with presence. One afternoon, after they'd wrapped an interview, Clara turned off the recorder and said, "You know, your story isn't loud, but it lingers." Beatrice smiled. "That's how I've always lived. Quiet, but not gone." Months passed. The archive launched. A small exhibition was held at the downtown Civic Hall, featuring audio clips from different residents. Beatrice's voice, clear, measured, once played in the center display, surrounded by photos of her walking group, the library shelves, and a shot of her holding a Fierce Women Read mug. She stood in the back, unnoticed at first, watching people pause, listen, nod. A few wiped tears. A few smiled, as if recognizing something they couldn't name. Jared didn't attend. She hadn't expected him to. But Mel was there. June brought homemade lemon bars. Robert stood beside her the whole time. "You did good," he whispered. "Real good." And Beatrice, for the first time, believed it. Later that evening, back in her apartment, she made a cup of tea and pulled out the story draft she'd been working on. The one that began with the line, "I stopped asking to be remembered the day I remembered myself." She edited nothing. She just added a title, "The Quiet Legacy." Then she printed a copy and tucked it into the folder with her will. Not because she needed to leave instructions, but because someone someday might find it and understand who she really was, not erased, not forgotten, but whole. Beatrice sat by the window as the sun dropped behind the trees. There were no grand gestures, no last-minute phone calls, no dramatic scenes of redemption, just a woman, a life, and peace. She didn't win by proving anyone wrong. She won by becoming herself again in full. And if you're still here, listening, I want to ask you something. Have you ever had to rebuild your sense of self? Not with noise, but in silence? If you've ever quietly taken your life back piece by piece, leave A in the comments. Let's remind each other, quiet doesn't mean weak. It means chosen. It means strong.